أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I take great pleasure and honor in being able to participate in this webinar, uh, coming on the heels, coming one day after the official recognition of the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a very central and pivotal person as it relates to the American civil rights movement. And his influence went well beyond that of just his particular organization, the organization that he founded called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And I want to just give just a little commentary about this particular organization. Dr. King, who we know him famously from the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, that Dr. King was known for this bus boycott, but he was also known for his civil disobedience after this period during the boycott in the late 1950s. And after Dr. King adopted nonviolent civil disobedience as his primary and perhaps his only methodology to try to bring about change for oppressed and repressed communities in the urban areas, but particularly African American communities, Dr. King, as a well-educated, as an ordained Baptist minister with stellar credentials as an intellectual, that Dr. King actually found himself being ostracized and pushed to the side by many in the ministerial alliance, those who were his fellow ministers. And I'm not speaking necessarily about organizationally, but just in general, but also by, at that time, organized groups like the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And Dr. King made the very profound decision to break away from those more conservative ministerial organizations like the Southern Baptist Conference and even the work that he was doing with the NAACP and supporting their efforts throughout the South. Dr. King felt that it was necessary in order to really bring about some change, systemic change, as it related to African American people, to form his own organization. So this is what he did: the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This was actually founded in 1957 as a result of the resistance that Dr. King was getting. I'm not going to say for a majority of African American ministers, because I don't have that quantitative data, but I can say that he formed this organization because an overwhelming number of Black ministers did not support what he was doing. They were afraid of the civil disobedience tactics that he was employing in his organization, and the same with the NAACP. So in order to really impact and to galvanize a national movement in the area of civil rights, and which I'll from this point refer to as the Black freedom struggle, because it was a continuum that had started not in the 50s and hit its peak in the 60s and the 70s, but it's a continuum from the time that African people were kidnapped, brought to this country, and forcibly enslaved for over about 350 years. So the work that Dr. King did, we are all beneficiaries of that particular work, that he was an apostle of civil disobedience, and his imprint was stamped on this phase of the Black freedom struggle in this country, I would say from the 1950s until about 1967. And so the influence of Dr. King was such that he attracted many very young people, those who were students, high school students, but principally college students, and those who had dedicated themselves, who were the college age, but had dedicated themselves to the struggle for Black freedom in this country, like Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin. Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin was brought into the Black freedom struggle by his older brother, Ed. Ed had been a student at Howard University. Imam Jamil moved up to Washington, D.C., and was involved in a lot of the activist activities of his brother. And the organization that was formed called SNCC, which was formed in 1960 on the campus of Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Now, I'm not going to just belabor you all with a bunch of names and dates and figures. I'm going to bring this, tie this into the theme of this talk today. But individuals like Imam Jamil were attracted to a more, what was deemed to be a more balanced approach to civil disobedience and to calling people to come together, to organize, and to cast off the system and the manifestations of the systems of oppression that were in place, that were depriving African American people and urban people living in urban environments in general, whether they're Latino, but at this particular time in history, we're talking primarily about Black folks. We're talking about African American people in this country. So Imam Jamil became a part of a group that was formed in 1960 on the campus of Shaw University called the Southern uh, uh, I'm sorry, Southern Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. These young students were brought together on Shaw's campus by a very dynamic individual from this Black freedom struggle by the name of Ella Baker. And go to check Google, and you can Google about Ella Baker. I'll digress just here for a second. One of the unfortunate aspects of the writing of the history of the Black freedom struggle is that the dynamic role that African American women played in the Black freedom struggle is oftentimes downplayed, if mentioned at all. So I'll raise up this name of Ella Baker. She was a tremendous organizer. As a matter of fact, she was the one who gathered these students at Shaw University and told them that it's wonderful for them to be a part in working with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference led by Dr. King, but they needed to organize and formulate a youth group, a group that they could have more direct influence and control over. And hence, this is how this SNCC organization came into being. Imam Jamil was I think, if memory serves me correctly, was the fifth um, director, chairman, was the terminology that was used. He was the fifth chairman of SNCC. And he had followed by another very dynamic individual who was a graduate of Howard University, who was from Trinidad, the island of Trinidad in the Caribbean, by the name of Stokely Carmichael. Later in life, as he ideologically evolved, he changed his name to Kwame Ture. And so Kwame Ture, perhaps before Imam Jamil, who succeeded him, became the chairman of SNCC, Kwame Ture was perhaps one of the most dynamic, intellectual, fearless African Americans in the country. One who they were influenced by, El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X, would speak a word of truth to power, would not cow down and bow their heads in the face of opposition. And so let me move on a little bit in this discussion. because I want to talk about making a connection with these Black freedom struggle movements, the connection with food and the capacity of a community to feed themselves or not be able to feed themselves, and how these movements and other movements in the Black freedom struggle address the issue of food, food scarcity, food hunger in the Black community, not just in the southern communities and the rural areas. And I always found it very interesting that in states in the South where the land was so bountiful, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created land that had a yield so many months of the year, that there was so much starvation and near starvation in those rural areas, in particular amongst the African American community. Part of this was due in part to a lot of sharecropping. This was the act of those historically may have, even their ancestors may, a couple of generations down, may have actually been enslaved in the same areas. They weren't called plantations necessarily after the period of enslavement, but many of the people who were working the land as sharecroppers, that the people who owned the land would allow them to live on the land and grow crops and vegetables and fruits. And but that would not be for their own satisfaction. They were almost in close to enslaved conditions during the sharecropping phase of American history, which came up into recent times. And so these sharecroppers found themselves almost starving, even though they're growing all this food. But what they were allowed to keep for themselves and their families was so minuscule that they were in a relative abundance of food supply, but their intake was very low. And so you find organizations like SNCC in particular, even SCLC in the rural South were organizing around not just electoral conditions and the denial. This may have been their entree into the work, particularly throughout the South, but it evolved into recognizing that there was a more dire survival necessity that these folks were being deprived of, and I'm talking about food. And so you have groups like SNCC making attempts to, like in 1964, I think it was, they created what were called freedom schools. And these schools were created by SNCC to help re-educate and to educate African American kids in these rural areas. They were schools that were primarily done on the weekends. And part of what they did was to feed the kids because they recognized that as in addition to just the educational needs, they needed to have food. But perhaps the greatest example, because I want to tie this in to food and food scarcity and the necessity and the relevance of incorporating food into the work that we do on whatever level it is, with an organization that perhaps had the biggest footprint on the national consciousness as it relates to the federal government of the United States about food. And this was the Black Panther Party. And initially it was called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, founded in Oakland, California in 1966. And for the first 3 years of the Black Panther Party's existence, the organization was primarily known for their attire, for their appearance, wearing all black, wearing black berets. They were known for carrying weapons because they had not adopted the nonviolent philosophy of Dr. Martin Luther King and those who were influenced by him. people like Imam Jamil were influenced in their later, as they advanced in the Black freedom struggle. They were more influenced by the philosophy of El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X, by Robert Williams, a brother who here in North Carolina, in Monroe, outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, as early, I think it may have been as early as 1960, was voted as the president of the local chapter of the NAACP. But he was not a nonviolent guy. And at this particular point in the history in this country, white folks were just raiding Black communities. The Klan would just shoot up folks and things like this, and lynchings and all that. And Robert Williams, as the president of the NAACP, said, "No, we ain't having that. We're not going to do that." And he organized African American men to arm themselves. And when their neighborhoods were invaded by these domestic terrorists, or when their women were violated by these domestic terrorists, that they would respond not so much in kind, but they would not cower down and respond in a nonviolent way. And so this organization, the Black Panther Party, in Oakland, California, for the first 3 years of its existence, it was primarily known, and I'm not saying this trying to put them down, because I was of that mindset myself, that the Black Panther Party organized in Oakland, California, a free breakfast program for the children in the public school system in Oakland, California. And they would have free breakfast provided by Black Panther Party member volunteers who would get up early in the morning and prepare meals at their centers and churches and other places that had the capacity, the sitting capacity, the preparation capacity, and the willingness to allow this organization to come into their facilities to feed the children before they would go to school. And there's so many um, um, testimonies about from educators during this period, and those even today who were familiar with the work in these free breakfast programs of the Black Panther Party, uh, gave such high commendations, talked about how great it was that the party was meeting a need that so many of the children in their school systems, because it's spread across the country, in their school systems, something they critically needed. Because educators were saying these children can't be condemned and punished because they come to school and go to sleep in class, or they're acting so dull-witted, when we know that they are not dull-witted children. And the problem was that the children were not getting proper nutrition. They were not, because of the conditions in their houses, their parents, with all good intentions and efforts, were not able to provide them with the nutrition that they needed for the development of their brains, and to be sharp and alert and all of these things. So the Black Panther Party recognized this problem, and in Oakland in 1969 started a free breakfast program. This was one of the most influential and impactful a program that was ever done, in my humble opinion, that was ever done by this organization, because it was not requiring an ideological commitment from those who were receiving the services, these children or their parents. It required nothing from them other than to just get them here, and we'll feed them, and we'll have them in a safe environment, and we'll send them to school. And from this interaction with the community, the reservation that so many had about this organization, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, patrolling the police, and taking stands that many them personally were uncomfortable in taking. But because of their providing something as basic and as simple as food, a breakfast program, a daily breakfast program for the children in these depressed areas, particularly in African American communities, the level of reservation to interact with and these kinds of things just sort of went out the window, and people began to see the organization in a different light. And the federal government adopted a free breakfast program throughout every state in the United States as a result of the free breakfast program started by the Black Panther Party. Give you another little quick anecdote that doesn't directly relate to food and providing food and how food is so central to the development of communities. And so this point doesn't relate to this, but it's just another point that I had thought about that was developed by the Black Panther Party that again was used as a model for what was done across the country in clinics and in some schools across the country. And I'm talking about the testing for sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia was a disease, a condition at this particular point. We're talking about in the 60s and in the 70s, that it was a condition that was almost ignored. And I um, submit that the primary reason why it was ignored like it was because in this country, it seemed that the only people who had this disease, for the most part, were people of African descent, and particularly African Americans. Sickle cell is it's called this because there's, and I don't want to get into a long discussion about it, but it's a blood cell that forms in it like a sickle, and it creates. This is the most unscientific description you ever get, but it creates a blockage in a person's vein who has this disease because it's very painful. It shortens the lifespan of individuals. It's a very painful and horrendous condition. But the Black Panther Party, through their own research and having doctors recognize how this particular disease was one that was almost found exclusively in African American people. Now, today we know that many of our brothers and sisters coming from the Maghreb, in North Africa, in Morocco, across North Africa, that many of our Muslim brothers and sisters come from these countries and also have sickle cell. So it's not just something that uh, people, African Americans have. It's something in North Africa that condition was developed as well. But it was the Black Panther Party that educated America and Americans about this condition and led, like they led in providing food for children, breakfast program, and other feeding programs for children and adults. The Black Panther Party was critical in providing food in the repressed and depressed communities. Now, I want to just segue this to talk a little bit about how food, and please don't interpret what I'm saying as some kind of conspiracy theory. This is based on having lived a number of decades, having researched and been involved with people who know much more about conditions in this country than I could ever know. But food has been used as a kind of weapon of control. Food has been used as a social weapon in the United States, just as food has been used, as drugs have been used as a weapon for social control, particularly in urban communities and particularly in African American communities. And to just go back just a little bit before I really get into that, food, um, uh, the the um, the level of impact that not having proper nutrition, that historically, before the Great Migration of 7 million people leaving the South in the 20s, early 20s, leaving the South and living in the North and Midwest and out in California, that African American people owned a lot of land. And to not get into a long thing about this, but as long as folks were living on arable land, they could eat very healthy because they were eating fresh fruits and vegetables and they were growing the food. But there was something called the Black Land Loss, which by the millions of acres, African American people lost their land throughout the South through corrupt government officials, to uh, domestic terrorism, vigilantes running them off their land, and all of these kinds of things. And so Black land loss contributed, like today, uh, only 1% of the land in this country is owned by Black people. I mean, that's to me, it's an alarming statistic. Never mind the big mansions and that you see with people like LeBron. I love LeBron. I'm not saying this as a criticism, but the big mansions that you see that are owned and estates that are owned by Black people in this country, that is a small, almost infinitesimal minority. Black folks in this country own only 1% of the land. With the ownership of the land, whether you're talking about farming land in particular, that is your control mechanism over a population like Egypt, Sudan, because of the Nile River. They became rich and powerful because they had this, Allah had supplied them with a means to feed themselves and to feed their nation. And so Black folks have been deprived of this dynamic, this physical dynamic in the communities. And so just to talk about how the recognition that in the community in which we live, that there are people everywhere who are in need of nutritional food and supplements, that in our day-to-day affairs, we may, and I know I'm talking to an audience that does not feel this way, so I'm just saying this by chance, someone who's not a part of ICNA Relief or someone who may not have directly benefited from the programs of ICNA Relief, that there has to be a recognition that there is not an artificial need when individuals like myself say that food can be and has been used as a weapon of control in inner city communities, just like those children that were going to school in Oakland, California, and expanded these programs, as I say, all across the country. They had one right here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Our local Panther party had a free breakfast program like they had out in Kansas City. It was all in New York, all over the country. There has to first be a recognition that there's a need. And oftentimes, because of the surplus food that we may have been blessed with, that we're not trying to just meet a minimum nutritional requirement, that we are not conscious and aware that there are people in our midst, there are people in our cities, in our counties, who are going to bed nearly starving. As a matter of fact, ICNA, a few years ago, we did an entire year's campaign about hunger in America. At that particular time, based on the research, there were 39 million Americans who were classified not by some fanatical group, but by the United States government. The Agriculture Department said that 39 million Americans were food insufficient. which is just a euphemism of saying that these people are near starving to death. 39 million. That number has increased so much over the years. And so it becomes a testament to uh, the vision, the foresight, to the commitment to humanity that has been shown by ICNA Relief to be able to meet not all of them, because none of us can meet all of the nutritional and food needs of the communities in which we live. But as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commends those from amongst the believers who give of their food, they share of the food, not seeking anything from the people other than Allah's pleasure. That's the only thing that we ask for, and those in ICNA Relief are asking for. They're not looking and waiting for the people who are the beneficiaries of your food pantries that are established in so many need areas, not placed somewhere where people would have to, uh, make a train reservation to try to get out there, or how to ride an Uber, for 25 miles to try to get to, but providing in areas and communities where the need is present for food to provide these kinds of services. This is commendable. It is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that those who are part of this endeavor have first recognized the need and then organize yourselves in a manner that address the need. And so I tried to give a little bit of this African American civil rights history, this Black freedom struggle history, and try to tie this in and have as a focal point providing food, providing clothing, and oftentimes providing shelter, which are three of the necessities that ICNA Relief has so graciously, has without asking the community that's being served for anything, that it's not like there is a fundraiser that appears in the communities, these underserved communities, and we'll sell you things at a reduced rate. These items are given to the people who genuinely need. And this is something that is a critical component of the work of ICNA Relief. It's a critical component of the Islamic Circle of North America. It's a critical component. It's a critical emphasis for all of us who have an awareness about the conditions that people are living in today. It is critical for us to support these kinds of efforts, like what ICNA Relief has been doing for so many years now in this country. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue to bless this organization, ICNA Relief, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give a greater commitment, put a greater commitment into the hearts of those who are providing these services that ICNA Relief provides in the communities across this country. And that the goodwill that comes from these kinds of efforts, that this goodwill will carry on to the Muslim community in general, not just to the service providers in ICNA Relief, but it will come, this goodwill, this good feeling about the people who are bringing us, who are always empowering us to do what is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm going to thank you for your indulging me for the period of time that you have. I would like to ask if there are any questions that you may have. The tech folks on the other side of the screen here, who are behind working the magic on the screen, will get the questions to me. So if you have any questions or comments about anything, I was not trying to give like a complete history of the Black freedom struggle, or that known as the civil rights movement. But I feel feel strongly the necessity to commend ICNA Relief and those workers and volunteers of ICNA Relief who are providing such a much needed service. Let me just give one other quick point here too. You know, uh, recently, and recently I'm talking about since the onset of COVID-19 in the United States, and particularly in the last few months, I think the country is experiencing and witnessing a phenomenon that has been going on almost every day in suppressed communities, and that is a food deficiency. You know, we have a local, we have a food bank in the mosque where I'm the imam of here in North Carolina, and you know, as right even before the pandemic, we began to recognize that people were driving up in oftentimes luxury vehicles. And so the brothers and sisters who were operating the food bank, I asked them one day, you know, as I was standing there, because I try to make it every time they do it, I'm standing there just watching and trying to volunteer a little bit. And I said, do you think we're actually giving food to people who don't need it? I mean, these are not, don't look like the kind of people who get the food and go try to sell it on the block for drugs. But do you think that we are meeting the needs of the people? And I got an education from asking that question, because many of these brothers and sisters who were doing the service had personal conversations with the folks. They knew these people, and they knew about families, their suffering, this quick onset from having their parents having lost jobs. They haven't lost their jobs, and oftentimes losing their houses, and it's just only increased. So all over the country, what has been experienced in oppressed communities for decades and decades is now a phenomena that a much larger group of Americans have the empathy now, because they are experiencing these conditions themselves. Last thing I'm going to say, I remember watching something on television one day, and it was long, 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 long lines, wraparound lines going into, I think, was some kind of football stadium. And the people were lined up forever, and they had all these luxury cars, and they were lining up getting food. And this was in Dallas, Texas. And I said, wow, you know, I've been to Dallas a few times, and, you know, I've been in some of the areas that are a little, you know, they're not economically and financially stressed in Dallas, but I'd never seen anything like this. And the realization and asking about that situation, talking to folks in Dallas, was that this is nothing fake. The conditions that have been brought about from COVID has increased the need for food supply and food supplement programs. So I pray again that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will increase even more the capacity of ICNA Relief to expand its services as it has been doing now, but to meet the increased need that we find in the country. That continue what you're doing, but that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase your capacity to be able to address the new hunger, the new food deficient population that we have in this country, brought about so quickly, such a quick onset by the pandemic, by the invisible army of Allah that we call COVID-19. So, any questions here anywhere? Comments, questions from anyone? No questions so far. So, okay. I don't know how to sing and dance and all like that. Okay, so is this a question here? Okay. Dr. King says that power for poor people will really mean having the ability, the togetherness, the assertiveness, and the aggressiveness to win much needed changes. Do we have those things in our organizations and networks today? Is that is slipped down? Some other questions were coming in, and now I can't see on the screen the question that I was reading from. Okay, do we have those togetherness, assertiveness, and aggressiveness in our needed for change in our organizations today? Um, that's a very thoughtful question, an excellent question. I think that um, we can never have enough consciousness and um, the qualities that would be needed at any given moment through just our limited capacities as individuals and organizations. And so, as Dr. King was saying, that poor people not having the ability and the togetherness and the assertiveness to bring about much needed changes. You know, the interesting thing about social change struggle, as I have been involved with for all of my adult life and even started when I was in high school. The interesting thing about this phenomenon is that Allah has always put the desire and the inspiration into the hearts of individual men and women to help those that we're called upon to help by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Simply stated, that it's not a necessity or requirement for everyone who's working on behalf of the interest of the underbelly, if I could use this expression, of society, those who've been cast into a permanent underclass in the society by structural racism and through this oligarchy that, in my humble opinion, now rules this country, meaning it's the business class that when folks go to fight in wars now, you can almost trace back every encounter for the most part that this country has been involved with. Any war, any physical encounter, you can trace it back to some kind of economic or business interests, whether we're talking about oil, whether we're talking about heroin and the wars that have been fought in the so-called Middle East, the United States presence in Afghanistan, the longest war that has ever been fought by this country, continuous by this country. And if you look deeply into that situation, you find that there's been a tremendous pushback against the Taliban. And the Taliban, during the short period that they controlled the country of Afghanistan, was able to reduce the opium production in this country in Afghanistan to a very, very low figure. And then when it got down to that, they were driven out of the country. And now that golden, not golden triangle, but that area in Afghanistan is the largest producer of opium and cocaine, of opium, this ingredient for cocaine in the world. So there's been an economic incentive. And so oftentimes those who are suffering the most from deprivation have not had the luxury like some of us have had to be able to study certain phenomena and to try to travel to different places in the world to get an understanding, trying to get an understanding about certain things. And so it's not just going to be the poor people. It's never just been the poor people to bring about, I'm not going to say never, but what I'm saying, it takes all of us to bring about the kind of changes that are needed in the societies in which we live. It's not going to just be poor people. It's going to take those with resources to help, to donate. This is what was going on during the time of Dr. Martin Luther King, that this was what was going on in the time of the Black Panther Party, in other organizations. There has always been in this country those who were not of a certain economic and social status who have come in to help and assist and put their own security, economic and social security at risk by organizing and working on behalf of the poor and the oppressed in this country. So it's going to take all of us. And so it may not be just the poor people, enough poor people alone. May not just be the enough middle class and educated people alone. It may not be enough of this class or that class or this status in society, that status, but all of us together, which is something that I've loved about Islam from the time that Allah guided me to this way of life, that it brings everybody together. And the more we mature and develop in our understanding and practice of Islam, we realize that even those who were not Muslim made state who were in the freedom struggles in this country and other countries, that they espouse concepts that you and I, as Muslims, embrace. Right? That it's not going to be about a racial conflict. It's not just economic conflict. What we have in society to bring about all of these problems is, in my humble opinion, is a warring against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's something that, I'm sorry about my phone, I didn't silence it in advance here, that is something that all of us have to come together to address the problems in the society. Okay, the LGBTQIAYZ, the alphabets are added every day. It's sort of hard for me to keep up. I'm not saying this, trying to degrade anybody, but the alphabets just keep adding. Movement is hijacking the Black movement as they tried back when MLK was alive and failed. Today, we have well-respected Muslim leaders in our communities endorsing dangerous narratives as WOM-ECM. What's your take on this? That's the first time I've seen the WOM-XN. I just recently learned, not recently, I've known for a while now, but the Latinx label. At first, I thought this was something really, um, um, it was something up-to-date language expressing a certain kind of understanding. But then I had a brother explain to me, a Latino brother explain to me that no, this is just saying, Latino men, women, him, hers, people who use different pronouns to identify themselves, that is, was in that kind of all-inclusive language. So when I did a little research and saw that that's what it was, I said, well, no, I can't use that. I'm not going to use that. So this is the first time I've seen this WOM-X in, but it's coming from the same place. What's your take on this, and when are we going to start educating our Muslim youth on this? Efforts have started to educate ourselves, because we can't help anybody else unless we first have an understanding of the Book of Allah, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, to understand Islam ourselves, and understand the social phenomena, and analyze these phenomena as they develop around us. And to be quite honest, I don't think, in my humble opinion, I don't think that the analysis that some Muslims are giving to the situation about this LGBTQ uh, community and some of the commentary, at least some of the things that I've heard, uh, I, I, I attribute this first. I mean, people have different opinions. People much more Islamically educated than myself have very different opinions from me. But I would say, from my understanding of Islam, I think it's a very dangerous, slippery slope that uh, some of our brothers and sisters have embarked on. I don't want to falsely attribute intentions to anyone. Only Allah knows people's intentions. But I do know that as activists, those of us who are involved in the communities, I think is a necessity that we be able to draw the lines where this is Islam and this ain't. And I will just be safe and be called just just an old, backward, country boy or something. But if we can identify the line, then we will not get close to the line. Um, it's the Prophet ﷺ has made it clear to us: don't engage in doubtful things. So if there's doubt, stay away from it. It's like you grazing your sheep too close to the line, somebody else's property line. You just keep hanging over there. Your sheep, your goats, they're gonna go over there and eat up the people's grass. So if you have a line that is doubtful, the Prophet ﷺ made it clear: stay away from it. So unless and until there is the intellectual ammunition to justify opinions that we have. And I think that some of our brothers and sisters feel that they have that. I just happen to disagree with some of the opinions that have been shared. I choose to take, with my limited knowledge, that I'm just going to stay away from those things that I consider straight up haram or doubtful. It doesn't mean that I advocate gay bashing. You see two dudes walking down the street, and we run out the mosque with a war whoop, go out there and beat them down, and go back in the mosque, talk beer. Yeah, we beat them suckers down. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I do believe that uh, uh, we have to start in our homes with our children. Let me share this real quick, and I'll shut up. I uh, with my own daughters, I've recognized that from the oldest to the youngest, and all of them, in their more mature years, came up through the public school system. But there's a difference in attitude between those who are on the older end and then the younger ones on the younger end. There's a difference about this LGBTQ issue as it relates to Muslims and Islam and their tolerance for certain expressions. And what I found out years ago was that the programming of children about acceptance and how this is just an alternative lifestyle is programmed. It has for years and years been programming to our children at a very early age, like in elementary school with books. Billy's got two mommies, Sally's got two daddies, and they're showing in these little elementary school books, you know, couples like that and this kind of thing. So we have to understand ourselves. We have to try to protect our children and our youth to the best of our ability, no matter. And that comes from emphasizing and trying to instill in our children that this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, right? All of us, anybody can make mistakes. Anybody, everybody can make mistakes in judgment, in opinions, and everything else. The only thing that we know that is perfect is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's book. That's the perfect guidance for us. So I'll take my guidance from that. I'll take it from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'll take it from those who are in those areas are having the most narrow interpretation that you could possibly have. And so I'm sorry to talk so long on that issue, but it's an issue that as Muslims, we have to get more assertive about, particularly with the education of our youth. Many of the folks use noble causes to inject their ideologies, and that's why I ask, because it often takes away from what we're trying to achieve as an ummah in terms of being merciful to all mankind. And when we start having communities that of those alphabet letters that keep adding up, they will no longer have to worry about killing us, using police brutalities, games, food, etc., because we simply will no longer be able to produce more of our own kind. Jazakallah khair for answering the question, dear Imam. May Allah bless you immensely. Jazakallah. Any other question? I see one here that's Muhammad Nubi. Is this my good friend Muhammad Nubi? Can we raise the question up a little bit? I can't see the whole thing. It says, given the enormous wealth gap that exists between whites and American descendants of slavery, do you believe that we Muslims should advocate for, and it's cut off? So, Brother Omar, can you help me with that one? What's the rest of the question? I have a good friend in Raleigh, North Carolina. You know, I'm sure he's not the only Muslim Muhammad Nubi in the country, but maybe it is. I'm just, you know, telling him I can't see the whole question why I can't. Um, okay. Okay. And this private chat box, could you bring it down? Because that's what I'm looking at on the screen. It's in front of the screen. And see, you know, you're dealing with people who are so low tech that I don't know if I could do anything. So I'm at your mercy. So no, I can't do anything. Okay. Boop, 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 boop. Um, okay. It's so this is Muhammad Nubi is up above the one that's on the screen now that I'm reading about. Unfortunately, many of these, it's the one before that. Okay. Okay. There was a question on the screen, but and they keep popping up. But as I said, there's a box on my screen saying private chat, and it's blocking my ability to see across the bottom of the screen here. So if everybody's not asleep on the other side, if you could take that box down, I think I could do a better job with these questions. Click the private chat. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to do that. Is that the private chat? No, let's hit the wrong thing, y'all. Um, man. Okay, very good. Okay, given the enormous wealth gap that exists between whites and American descendants of slavery, do you believe that we Muslims should advocate for reparations to correct the economic injustice? I would say 100%. We should be on the side of reparations in this country. A very quick response also is that not to minimize the suffering of the Japanese people in the concentration camps that they were put in during World War II in this country. But, and I'm not trying to create a misery index, but what they went through during the relatively few years that they were in these horrendous camps is nothing compared to the 350 years of chattel slavery that African people of African descent have gone through and continue to go through in this country. And so, what nation wouldn't be the wealthiest in the world if you had free labor for 350 years? You know, and so if the Japanese could be given reparations for their period in those concentration camps in the United States during World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, then it's ludicrous. It's madness for any Muslim, in all fairness, to not support reparations for those who ancestors toiled for centuries for nothing. And if it were just like you locked into some labor camp, that's one thing. But the brutality, the stripping of our religion, right? So many of the folks who were here who were enslaved came over here as Muslims, practicing observant Muslims, imams, hafiz, scholars, just a regular person. So yes, I think we should advocate for reparations. There's currently a reparations bill that's in Congress today. I don't know how far it's going to go. It started the process started in Congress with John Conyers and may have been going back all the way to 1976. I think John Conyers first introduced this bill. But yes, I think we definitely should 100% as a Muslim community. Don't just take my word for it. Read up about reparations. Read materials on this, and inshallah, not right this second, but if anyone has like to know some good references to read, I'll be able to pass that on. Okay. Any last questions or comments, or any other questions and comments? On this issue about the number of Africans who were kidnapped and brought to this country as enslaved people, I started researching this as a Muslim probably around 1978 or 76, somewhere 76, 78, maybe 77, 77 or 78. And at that particular time, I don't know if there were any books in mainstream libraries about the subject. I mean, when I first started looking into it, it may have been earlier than that. The Muslim Student Association had a magazine, and I can't remember what it's called right now, but they had a magazine that they had an article in there. This which started me on a trek to research by a brother out of Chicago by the name of Clyde Ahmed Winters. And Clyde, that article about Muslims amongst the enslaved Africans in this country, almost turned my life around, intellectual life around for real. And so I started doing all this research back during that time, doing microfiche and libraries like Duke and Wake Forest and different universities like that, and start compiling information. And alhamdulillah, so much information is out there now. But what I was going to say was that when this, when I first started this kind of research, the research at that time was saying that maybe 15% of the Africans brought to this country as enslaved people were Muslim. As the years creeped by, it went up to 20%. The research was documenting and showing this. Then it goes up to 25%. Then it goes up to 30%. Now people are saying 35 to 40, with a projection that when that true research is finally done, it may be as high as 50% or more of people who were brought here, kidnapped from the African continent and brought to the United States, were Muslim when they were forced onto those hellholes on water and brought across the Atlantic Ocean. So, research rewards our efforts. We can't expect folks who have spent so many years and time and attention to try to suppress people, people and a population, and in particular trying to write about and scare people off from Islam, or make people feel so disgusted about their being Muslim. And my ancestors came over here in the bottom of a hellhole boat, right? And so this is not something that I'm ashamed of. No, this is one of the worst. It's victim blaming, and we have to purge ourselves as Muslims from this, particularly those who come, like I did, from the African American community, and think that Islam is an avenue, is a mechanism for us to escape from that horrendous history. No, I'll never want to forget it. I don't let my kids, I don't let nobody around me forget it. I want them to hate it as an act of vuln, as much as the people of Musa hated what Fir'aun was doing to the Bani Israel. It's the worst expression of human brutality over centuries in my research that the world has ever produced. And so, folks better be glad that I'm Muslim. Alhamdulillah. They better be glad that a lot of us, Allah guided us to Islam. Because I tell anybody, I was on the brink and Allah pulled me back. So, you better be glad that many of us were guided to Islam and given guidance, because without guidance, some crazy stuff would happen with the same intensity or more than what we saw happening with those domestic terrorists running up into the U.S. Capitol with hand ties, plastic hand ties, and putting a noose on the area right at the United States Capitol. I mean, the symbol, one of the greatest symbols of shameful symbols of misguidance that this country has produced. This was hang a gallows, or whatever you call these things, and hang a rope, a hanging rope. They're talking about they want to hang Mike Pence. They want to do this to Nancy Pelosi and these kinds of things. So think about these people feeling that they have been done wrong without the guidance. Just think about how crazy people like me would have responded if Allah hadn't guided us to. So Islam is such a beautiful way of life, but it should never make us try to cut off our the ties of kinship because we don't like the history. It doesn't read right. No, so we have to create a new history. Sorry to talk so much. Any other questions, comments? Check out Dr. Sandy Darity on YouTube about reparations. I haven't seen it. I'll check that out, inshallah. I will provide one of our technicians here tonight, Brother Omar Raginwala, a list of books that he can share with you all as well. And the reason why I'm a book freak, and one of my young friends told me the other day, well, you keep talking about books, you better start talking about some, 15-minute YouTube videos or, something like that. Can't help myself. Okay, very good. Yeah. So ICNA Relief will share a book list that I'll provide, inshallah, tonight, so I won't forget it. Anything else? Prophet Muhammad said the excellence of Islam is leaving what doesn't concern him. Thanks, Imam Khalid, for sharing the history, the commentaries, and the nourishment that occurred during these times. Alhamdulillah. If you give Biden advice on how to heal our nation, what will it be? Take Shahada, swear in, get sworn in, all if they aren't Muslim, they are open to the guidance of Islam. And I'm saying this kind of tongue in cheek, but I think that there are two things can be true at the same time. And in reference to this particular question about what would I tell Biden, one truth, the overwhelming truth to me, is that Islam and using the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to regulate and to establish civil society around that guidance that came from Allah and through the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's the only hope for us. And then, oftentimes, just to digress just for a second, it gets harder and harder sometimes when you are operating in circles, like I have for a number of years, of people who come with some sophisticated political understandings and analysis of society and economics and these kinds of things, it becomes very hard and difficult for me to, I do it, but I'm just saying the obstacles that are put in place when we have Muslim nations, right? And you know who they are. I don't have to call them out by name, but we have Muslim nations who act in some of the most treacherous ways that anyone in a faith community could act with another person in the same faith community. And that's a lot of double talk by just saying that it's shameful what some of the example that Muslim nations are setting on the world stage in coming in alignment and agreement with nations who have openly declared that they're enemies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the believers. I'm not going to call them out by names, right? If you don't know who I'm talking about, then it won't do any good. But it's shameful and it gets difficult. So I've never been an apologist for people who are doing wrong, even if they are Muslim. I think we hurt our cause by trying to justify the unjustifiable from an Islamic context. And so our Muslim nations, this is shameful stuff. So we can't just say, my advice to Biden, if, you just be Muslim, you be, the country and get a Muslim cabinet to be okay. No, they won't. No, you won't. Won't the nation won't. Because it takes committed Muslims, right? Not committed just to Salah, just to Zakat, as if the only mission of the Prophet Muhammad was to teach us the acts of ibadah. No. This is a social way of life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has at its apex justice, right? Establishing justice in the society. So when we talk about how do you advise Biden, the advice would have to be for Biden that don't utilize your faith to have you provide leadership to this nation and a direction to this nation that is consistent with your teachings. I'm not talking about cultish type of teachings or anything else. But the core teachings, if you say you're a follower of Isa, alayhi salam, then be true to that. Not just on Sundays when you go to church every Sunday, but be true to that. It was encouraging for me to see that he said that the first thing he's going to do, one of the very first things he's going to do when he comes inaugurated tomorrow, is to lift this so-called Muslim ban, this Muslim travel ban, which has been so disruptive for Muslim families and so unnecessary that the guy who, as Biden's predecessor, put in place just out of this hatred for Islam. So it's difficult for me to say, there's so much that I would feel that would need to be explained or said, but and I get to the point of two things can be true at the same time. The two things that can be true at the same time in this country is that for every Muslim, every committed Muslim in the country, we have to believe that Allah has provided us with a perfect system of guidance for governance, for individual, and for the society. We have to believe that. It's not something we can compromise on. And then the other thing that can be true at the same time is that we as Muslims are living in a very minority, we have a very minority population, right? 1% of the total population of this country are Muslim. We have an outsized influence, but still our numbers are minuscule compared to the 330 million people that at least there's some census information about that number. It may be many, many millions more that just haven't been taken in by the census. So, what can be true is that our beliefs don't change about the governance of human beings and society, regardless of who's the president, whether it's a dunce, a fascist like Donald Trump, or whether it's a person who, through life experiences, has uh, had empathy burned into his soul. Because I can remember when years ago, Joe Biden was one of the biggest racists in the Senate. One of the biggest racists in the Senate. His boys were some of the most worst Southern senators in the United States. But I don't see the same Joe Biden now from his life experiences than what I saw decades ago in this country. So healing advice is, uh, I'm sure I would hope that with all of the Muslims that he has on these subcommittees and advisory committees and all like that, that they have shared a copy of the Quran with them, that they are trying, they have his ear. There is uh, a program when I jump off here tonight that I got an invitation to come to where I don't know if Biden, I read it so quickly, but it has something to do with Biden's Muslim advisors. And I think he may jump in for a minute or something to try to see what, just listen in and what's going on. So what can be true? We can be loyal American citizens, by the same token, not compromising the positions that we take for standing up for justice and standing up for what is right. That can't be part of my of any party affiliation. The party for us, all of us, is Hezbollah, and that can be true while we are in this land, and the governance of this land is what it is. Those are two things that, to me, for every Muslim, have to be true simultaneously. So that's my advice to myself, to you, and to him. Okay. So is that it? Anything else? Okay, if so, no other questions, alhamdulillah, I really thank Allah for the time that um, I've been able to spend with you all this evening. Forgive me if I've said anything that is against the book of Allah or the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, anything that may have offended you in any kind of way. It was not my intention to do so. Anything that I've said that is correct, it comes from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Anything that is wrong is my fault. And I ask Allah to forgive me, and I ask for your indulgence. Assalamu alaikum.